As the year passes us by, I think I'm not the only one that feels like playing something a little more spooky when we get to this time of year.
But I've never really been one for playing explicitly scary games, even at this time of year, which I imagine would throw most people's usual Halloween lineup straight out of the window. I'm not actually going to throw any games out of the window, by the way.
I do, however, like that sort of classic Halloween vibe from earlier years in animations like this, or how Halloween is depicted in something like The Nightmare Before Christmas. And that's the kind of thing you'll often find in a few platforming games. You know, these kind of games will sometimes just have that specific thing I'm looking for as one of its level themes. Mad Monster Mansion from Banjo-Kazooie, Spooky Swamp from Spyro 3, The Cave of Bad Dreams from Rayman 2, none of which is outright scary. Well, not anymore anyway. Not gonna lie, The Cave of Bad Dreams was pretty scary when I was younger, but yeah, you've got things like ghosts, monsters, ghouls, pumpkins, and all that kind of stuff, which I am a fan of.
But it's not very often an entire game has that specific vibe I'm looking for. I mean, it does happen every now and then though, with ones I really should revisit sometime. And yeah, I could go down the route you'd expect the mostly PlayStation-centric YouTube review dude to go down and pick up the first in a franchise of 4 games, where 3 of them are basically the same game anyway.
But as it happens, a more recent game with exactly that kind of classic Halloween feel going on popped up on my radar a while ago with Pumpkin Jak, an indie 3D platformer released back in October of 2020. I do actually remember seeing a bit of hype surrounding the release of this one, with a playable demo launching on Steam getting a fairly decent reception too. But as for the full game, yeah, it has taken me a while to get around to this one. I think I was just busy playing Crash Bandicoot 4 at the time, and by the time I did want to check this one out, I figured it would be a good idea to just hold back and play it now for, you know, the spooky, scary vibes or whatever. The main thing that caught my eye with this one, well, outside of that visual theme and it obviously being some kind of platformer game, would be this right here on the website, labeling Jak and Daxter and MediEvil as its main sources of inspiration, which, yeah, I do like those games. Both of those handle exploration in a pretty decent way, as well as Jak and Daxter the Precursor Legacy just basically being one of my favourite 3D platformers of all time. So yeah, let's see what happens when we swap out that Jak for this one. Starting off, the title screen here definitely caught my eye. Lots of thick fog with some nice light shafts blasting through it and a couple of skeleton guys stood there watching in the distance. I think I've made it pretty clear by now that I do like these kind of bespoke, specifically created title screens that show you what kind of mood the game is going for even before you start playing. Even better if it's using real-time rendered graphics, and yeah, this definitely checks that box. So, starting things off, and we have the story. Like most games similar to this, it's not too complicated and it doesn't really take too long to get started, but I do like what's going on here. Basically, the devil is bored and wants to take over the world, sending in an army of monsters to the human world to help him do that, all of which are being stopped by humanity's champion, a powerful wizard. So, in response, the devil sends humanity's biggest trickster, a man by the name of Jak, who was even able to trick the devil himself in the past. He sends the soul of Jak into the human world in the form of a pumpkin, with his quest being to find and destroy that wizard. And that's it. Jak ends up with the body of a scarecrow in the opening scene, and you're off. There's a few minor twists and turns along the way, but nothing that's going to outright blow your mind, and you'll meet a few different characters, both friendly and hostile, throughout the game, and eventually you will face off against that wizard. But yeah, the premise here is pretty fun, and a nice little setup that quickly gets the game moving. When you do get started, you're going to quickly see what this game is all about. A bit of platforming, a bit of combat, and these are usually done in little bursts, one after another. So as well as the basic moving around and jumping, Jak can do a double jump and attack with a variety of weapons that you'll unlock more of throughout the game. You'll also meet this crow character really early on that tags along with Jak for the rest of the story, and if you press one of the shoulder buttons, you can launch the crow at enemies for a quick way of attacking from a distance. This is something I do like, and I wish it got used a little more often though, maybe as a way of activating switches and platforms for Jak, or deactivating traps, but it's mainly just used for quite literally getting in a ranged hit against enemies before you then take them on in closer combat. As for jumping around, well, like I say, the moveset is pretty basic, with Jak being able to jump, double jump, and that's pretty much it really. He can also grab onto ledges, and the pull-up animation is really quick, which does help keep the pace of moving around up, but yeah, that's about it sadly. Jumping around from platform to to platform is rarely challenging, as you can time that second jump to get massive airtime, making a lot of obstacles a breeze to get by here. And while I'm not strictly against double jumps in my games, this one is pretty overpowered. There's no trade-off in momentum for doing that second jump, so you can pretty much point and click your way to where you want Jak to go. As well as that, I do kind of wish there was a wider variety of things you could and need to do in order to benefit that obstacle course platforming that this is quite clearly trying to go for at times. And I did have a few ideas on how that could be achieved here, but I'll go into that later on. While all of this is simple to control, I do at least like the ideas behind some of these platforming sequences, like this part where a barn catches fire and you have to outrun the blaze, which was a fun idea that fit the theme of the level. This definitely gave me some Crash Bandicoot chase sequence vibes in a way, but yeah, again, it's pretty straightforward stuff when you're actually playing it. In between the platforming and combat, you'll come across some of these other sections every now and then, like when Jak has to remove his head, and you'll do a little puzzle or some kind of minigame as the pumpkin. Most of the time these are pretty good, like this one where you have to guide a bomb towards a stack of dynamite by nudging it along with Jak's attack move, or this one where you have to recreate a fittingly spooky piece of classical music by playing a game of Simon Says. There's also these vehicle sections from time to time which are okay for the most part. In fact, a couple of them ended up being a really nice treat, like this one where you have to use a minecart to travel all the way through the area you'd previously platformed around in order to reach the next area. The fast pace of this combined with some fitting music was a nice rush. In fact, the music in general is pretty fun throughout the game. There's maybe one or two of these offshoot bits of gameplay that weren't as impressive to me, like this one where you have to sort boxes by their shapes. But like the rest of the minigames and the Pumpkinhead sections, these don't appear too often and are over fairly quickly, so they didn't outstay their welcome. But yeah, the other half of the game is going to be you taking on those groups of monsters and fighting them off, which isn't too bad to begin with, but, well, this kind of thing is something I feel some games do well and others not so well, and yeah, I feel like Pumpkin Jak can throw this kind of stuff at you a little too often at times. The first weapon you get is this rusty looking shovel, which can do a spin attack after hitting an enemy a few times, and a ground pound if you attack after doing a double jump. And with each level that passes, you'll fight that area's boss and unlock another weapon with a different set of attacks to do. You can also dodge attacks, which I thought was a little weird at first, but yeah, when in small groups and up against enemies that attack up close, I did find the dodge move to be pretty handy, and it's nice that all of these weapons have a unique attacking animation that plays after doing a dodge roll, so you get that nice kind of rhythm of attacking and then dodging and counter-attacking. But it really doesn't take long for Pumpkin Jak to feel like that becomes less about skilled timing and more about just pressing the buttons as quickly as you can to get the job done. All of the other weapons you get later on are the same in that they've got their own variations of attacks you can do after a double jump or a dodge roll, with some being way more useful than others, but I would say not in the good way. So to me, the good way would be getting new weapons that work better in certain situations. MediEvil almost did this well to some extent, but even then there were some weapons that kind of broke that game's combat, so my brain will always jump to another one I've shown today with Deadhead Fred, and how each equipable head has a very specific enemy it can counterattack, giving you a prompt as to which one you should use, as well as a few of them having uses outside of combat, like exploring the world around you. Man, I really should replay this game sometime. Here with Pumpkin Jak, however, you kinda just gradually unlock more and more weapons that do more and more damage to everybody, rendering some of the previous ones you unlock, like that shovel, almost completely useless. And while I don't think it's the most powerful weapon in terms of damage per button press, wow, does the shotgun break this game's combat. This thing has a quick fire move you can do if you fire the shotgun straight after doing a dodge roll, but there's nothing to stop you from doing that over and over again, so some of these parts where the enemies would spawn in really quickly just became a game of how fast I could alternate between pressing circle and square, and I don't really know what else to say about that. I guess that's my problem with the combat in this game in general, to be honest, that after a while it loses that initial charm of being able to dodge and attack these smaller groups of enemies when it becomes you versus an entire army of them, where the best strategy is to just keep attacking non-stop via button mashing, which does ruin the pace. It's not all bad though, as the boss fights you come across at the end of each stage are actually pretty good. While not all that difficult, these at least do a better job of keeping the fights based around the platforming gameplay, rather than that button mashy combat you've been doing everywhere else. Each boss has a unique attacking gimmick, with you needing to avoid that and then wait for the perfect moment to strike back. You've got some of the usual suspects like projectiles in a circle pattern, but then you've also got fights based around things like avoiding rush attacks, or getting the boss to damage itself, or jumping through small small holes within these energy wall things. And as I say, at the end of each of these boss fights you'll get a new weapon as a reward, and I do like the little animation that Jak does when you get them. But this boss fight here though, just in terms of the visuals alone, really gave me some Toy Story 2 vibes of all things. Just the way the slime is formed into the shape of the monster you're fighting. I don't know, just kind of reminded me of this guy, which, yeah, any game that reminds me of the Toy Story 2 video game gets a little thumbs up from me. But after playing through the entirety of Pumpkin Jak, there's definitely some areas that I feel could have been expanded on to make what's here a little more well-rounded. The platforming and combat, for example. I know I've ragged on a bit how I feel like the combat gets a little too much at times, but that's only because I did have a few ideas on how I would have perhaps merged them together a little closer to save them from feeling like these two completely separate ideas that you alternate between all the while. So yeah, what if each of these weapons also had some sort of platforming move that they could do to help benefit exploration, as well as having their own set of animations for attacking like they currently do. So the rusty shovel that you have at the beginning of the game, you could perhaps spin that around really fast for some kind of higher jump, like the helicopter thing from Ape Escape. The Grim Reaper scythe that you get your hands on, perhaps you could use this for swinging off of hooks, kind of like Sly Cooper does with his cane in those games. And the shotgun, maybe that could be used for some sort of third mid-air jump by firing it downwards, acting similarly to how Super Mario spins around in the Galaxy games, or how Dingo Dial uses his vacuum thing in Crash Bandicoot 4. Yeah, that's probably a better example now I'm thinking about it. But the main one for me, and where I got this whole idea from, was with the sword weapon and how Jak will float around rather than walk or run when you have it selected. And I thought it would have been cool if Jak could glide around when he has the sword equipped because of that, but no, you just use it like any other weapon. Granted, the mid-air attacks this thing has are really powerful, so along with the shotgun, this became one of my go-to weapons after unlocking it, but again, it's only really put to use during these combat sequences, which I feel is a massive shame that none of the weapons actually benefit the other side of the gameplay, because there's definitely potential there, and it would bridge the gap between these two main styles of gameplay that you keep flipping between. Combine that with some sort of quick weapon swapping command, and there could have been something like multiple hooks to swing off of and then glide over a large gap in quick succession, all built around Jak using the weapons he gathers throughout the game. It would even work out for optional extra things too, as I did try it out, and yeah, the game does remember that you've collected certain weapons from future levels if you go back and replay older ones, so there's definitely a few things that could have been done there too. Maybe a few things dotted around here and there to entice you to come back for more at a later time once you've unlocked a certain weapon. The shovel, for instance, you never actually use this as a shovel. There could be little piles of dirt on the floor and you could dig them up to get one of the collectibles or something like that, but no, you just use it to hit monsters in the face repeatedly during those combat sections, which is a bit of a shame. But anyway, going back to something I really like, hands down, I've got to give props to how this game looks and sounds. And no, I don't just mean because I'm playing the PC version with all of its fancy graphics options and whatever, because I don't really care about any of that. But the direction taken with this game's art and music is just so good in basically every area. I love the little hand-drawn artwork for all of the characters when you talk to them, and the music. I gave it a quick mention earlier on, but the soundtrack to this game is really fun. There's quite a few spooky-ified versions of classical music tracks, as well as a bunch of original stuff in here too, and it's definitely got that sort of PS2 era platformer feel about it, down to a T. Oh, it's so good. Visually, I really like the way the story is being told throughout the game with these storybook sequences, with the camera panning around through the different books and pages, all with these nice effects applied to them, but most of all, just when in the game, I really like how it looks. Pumpkin Jak has that sort of chunky cartoony art style that works really well here, which, funnily enough, is a similar style to the one the MediEvil remake went for as well. But in particular, I really like this game's use of lighting because it does a great job of conveying all of that spooky Halloween stuff without coating the entire game in literal darkness. Each level has a nice atmospheric glow about it because of this lighting, with the fields of the first level having an orange glow, the mines of the second level having a blue glow, the swamps of the third level having a green glow, and you get the point. It's a good way of having those Halloween themed visuals without sacrificing the game having a colour palette or standout visuals. This part here where a turret starts attacking you is another great example of the lighting too, because when the turret is about to attack, it emits a bright light that's a good indicator for you to move out of the way, but it also casts all of the shadows into the areas that will work as cover as well, so it ends up looking really cool and serving a purpose at the same time. It's just something I noticed which I thought was really cool and worth a mention. And like how the platforming and combat pretty much go hand in hand with this one, I feel like the collectibles go hand in hand with the art direction and lighting of Pumpkin Jak because of the way these crow skulls you have to collect also glow. And I know that sounds kind of redundant to say, you know, that the collectible thing in the platformer game glows, but in a game like this, with the art direction being the way it is and the sheer size of the levels, the slight red glow that these things have and how it naturally flickers on and off as it rotates around, you can get a really good look out for these things even if they're way off in the distance. Time after time I'd come across a bigger area like this and see a crow skull way over there, and it was pretty nice knowing that when I get to that block of land or platforms or whatever it may be, I'll find something now I know where it is. Outside of that, these things are kind of well hidden, I guess. I wasn't able to find every single one throughout the entire game, but I did get all of them in a couple of levels, and I don't know, you get a feel for this kind of thing after playing so many platformer games. Around corners or in the opposite direction to where the level naturally leads, you know, that kind of thing. Although, now I'm thinking about it, it is kind of weird that the levels do lead in such a linear way though. It's not bad, as the game is designed around the levels being linear, but with games like MediEvil and Jak and Daxter being thrown on the table in terms of inspiration, I did go into this assuming I'd have some bigger areas to play around in and maybe do some different objectives in a kind of sandbox. I know it's not a platformer, but MediEvil, for instance, has you running around all over the place doing various things like finding keys and activating machinery, and Jak and Daxter does all of that too, but with platforming as well. And yeah, you do kind of do that in one of the levels here to some extent, where you have this more open graveyard area and you have to go down several paths in order to find the 7 deadly sins, but that's about it really. The rest of the time you'll mainly be going in one or two fairly clear directions. The levels don't feel small though, that's for sure. There's plenty of those moments where you can see loads of the level and areas beyond it at any given time, which is nice for that feeling of this being a more expansive world, even if that's not actually the case all of the time. Sure, it's a pretty old trick by the grand scheme of things. I remember Crash Bandicoot doing this pretty well when you could see the castle in the distance, but yeah, going back to the collectibles for a second, I would usually just ask myself, if I was going to hide this, where would I put it? And usually that's where they ended up being. Again, that's not a dig at this game specifically, I've just played a lot of 3D platformers and you kind of get a knack for this sort of thing after a while. When you collect these things, you can use them to buy some cosmetics for Jak, which, yeah, you know, I do like this kind of thing. Earning more costumes in games like this is always nice, but that is all there is to it here. There's also these gramophones you can find, which are actually pretty well hidden compared to the crow skulls. I only found 2 of these throughout the entire game, and they make Jak do a bit of a dance, but I don't really know what else they do. Perhaps they do something if you collect all of them throughout the entire game, but yeah, like I say, they're pretty well hidden compared to the crow skulls, so I don't know.
As for the rest of the story, well, yeah, technically we are in the spoilery part of the video now, because I'm going to talk about how the game ends, but I'll be honest, I don't really think there's that much to spoil here in the grand scheme of things, so do whatever you feel is right, because, yeah, I am about to talk about the end of the game now.
So yeah, as you go through each level, Jak will get stronger and stronger, taking out more of the human resistance, and by the end of it all, he pretty much does what he set out to do at the start of the game, meaning I didn't expect the ending to work out the way it did because the bad guys actually win. Yeah, I totally expected the wizard somehow ending up being the bad guy, but no, Jak is very much the bad guy here. If anything, seeing as you definitely are the bad guy, I kind of wish the entire game leaned into that a little bit more, because I didn't really feel like I was doing anything particularly evil as such. It was more the story telling me that I'm the bad guy that cemented it. Did anybody ever play Overlord? I remember that game kind of having the same problem, because you were supposed to be this big evil overlord, but you just went around and killed monsters and stuff. I don't know, it's been years since I played that, but that's kind of what it reminded me of. Anyway, the world kind of gets destroyed or taken over by the devil as a result of Jak's actions, leaving him free to roam around as this all-powerful being. And yeah, I do admire this game for sticking to its guns when it comes to the story. Sometimes you get a feeling that you can see where the story is going with these kind of games, so it is nice to have one that did actually go in the opposite direction to what I was expecting. Again, like the intro, it's all your basic sort of storybook kind of stuff, but that's fine, and it does get the job done here. I definitely think there's room for a follow-up too, that's for sure. Maybe Jak gets bored of his newfound power and then decides to trick the devil one last time, or something like that. I don't know. At the end of it all though, I would say, I don't know, this was okay, I guess. If you like the simple act of jumping around mixed in with a bit of combat, you might get something out of this gameplay, but personally, I feel like this is a bit too bare bones at what it's trying to do a lot of the time, which is a shame because, as I say, with a few more movement options, this easily has the potential to be more interesting to play. Don't get me wrong though, the game is still pretty charming with a great set of visuals and character designs, but the moment-to-moment gameplay just feels like it needs a little something to help it stand out a bit more beyond that visual style. Again, I'm fully aware this was made by a very small team of people, so seeing those little progress screenshots in the credit sequence was really nice. It's great to see how the game was showcased at little indie events and seeing how the earlier art and character designs gradually reached what ended up in the final product. I actually find this kind of stuff fascinating, and you really don't see much of it with some of these bigger budget games these days, so I'm all for seeing this in the indie games. And you know what? I went into this expecting some sort of PS2 era platformer, and I guess that's what I got really. I just wouldn't put this up there with the likes of Jak and Daxter myself, despite the apparent influence. For me, this would be closer to something like Scalar in that it's got a little too much button mashy combat and not enough movement in the platforming holding it back. But at the same time, there's a lot of potential here that could easily be tapped into with a sequel or some kind of other game in a similar style. And looking into it, yeah, that process seems to have already begun with Akimbot, a platformer shooter game developed by the same people, which has given me some serious Ratchet and Clank vibes. Look at this looks pretty good. Definitely gonna keep my eye on this one. But yeah, Pumpkin Jak, a fairly quick game to get through, lasting about 4 or 5 hours, and maybe a bit longer than that if you take the time to find all of those collectibles. There's also some kind of time trial mode here based on what I can see in the level select screen, but I'm not really in a rush to do that just yet. I won't write off revisiting this and maybe doing that someday, but like I say, a wider moveset would have made that more appealing, to be honest. As for the price, I'm not gonna lie, I don't really think it's worth the full asking price as it is here on Steam, but it is kind of irrelevant to me anyway, as I not only got the game while it was on sale, but it was also through the means of an art trade I did with a friend because they wanted some graphic design custom logo malarkey done, so yeah, shout out to Ben for that one. But if this game is on sale, like it was when I got my hands on it, then yeah, it's fine enough for that price, I guess. Just take everything I've said into account and keep in mind that this was made by a very small team of people, so what we have here is pretty impressive in a way, just maybe not the £25 kind of way.
As for me, well, you know, there's plenty of other games I can play in the future and talk about on this channel, but in the meantime, for a video like this, Pumpkin Jak ended up doing the trick. Or the treat. Or neither of those things, because I did this video way too late and it's not even Halloween anymore.